Last week, Rachel Reeves stood up in Parliament and told the country that borrowing is £18 billion lower than expected. She said it like it was good news, and technically it is. Borrowing less money is better than borrowing more. But here's what nobody in that chamber asked. If you're borrowing £18 billion less than you planned, where did that money go? Because it didn't go to the NHS, it didn't go to house building, it didn't go to your pocket. So where is it? That's what we're getting into today. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something that most people watching the Spring Statement coverage completely missed. A number buried in the OBR report that tells you exactly where Britain's money is actually going for the rest of this decade. It will change how you think about this government's economic plan. Let's start with what the £18 billion actually is, because Reeves's framing of it was politically clever and slightly misleading. She said borrowing is £18 billion lower than forecast in the autumn budget. That's accurate. But what that means is not that the government saved £18 billion. It means the government is borrowing £18 billion less than it planned to. It's still borrowing. Massively. Public sector net borrowing this year is forecast at 4.3% of GDP. That's around £133 billion. The government is still adding £133 billion to the national debt this year alone. The £18 billion improvement comes from three sources. First, higher than expected tax receipts. More people paying more tax, partly because of economic activity, partly because of fiscal drag, the process by which frozen tax thresholds pull more of your wages into higher tax bands. Second, lower debt interest costs. Interest rates came down slightly faster than expected in early 2026, reducing what the government pays to service its existing debts. Third, slower growth in some benefit payments. Though welfare spending is still forecast to rise by £18 billion this year to £333 billion, that's not a typo. The welfare bill is going up £18 billion, even as borrowing comes down £18 billion. Two different 18 billions. So where did the fiscal improvement come from? Higher taxes, fiscal drag, the invisible tax rise that no politician ever has to vote for, so the government has a bit more breathing room than expected. What are they doing with it? Here's what Reeves announced and what she chose not to announce. Defence. This is where the big money is going. Reeves used the Spring Statement to reiterate the biggest uplift in defence spending since the Cold War. £650 million committed to upgrade Typhoon jets, a new Royal Navy frigate, a £1 billion helicopter deal with Leonardo, defence spending rising to 2.5% of national income by 2030. The Iran war, which started 2 days before the Spring Statement, made this announcement look very well timed. Whether it was planned or fortunate depends on your level of cynicism. Welfare. £333 billion this year, rising by an average of £15 billion a year for the next 5 years. By 2031, the welfare bill is projected to hit £407 billion. The OBR flags this as a significant risk. Health and disability caseloads surging post-pandemic, costs running ahead of what the government has budgeted for, debt interest. This is the one that should make every British taxpayer angry. The UK government will spend more on debt interest payments this year than on most individual departments. Government debt is sitting at 93% of GDP. Every single year we borrow more, the interest bill goes up. It's the financial equivalent of only paying the minimum on your credit card. The balance never goes down. And here's what is not getting the money. House building. The government's flagship target of 1.5 million new homes is already in serious trouble. London house building dropped 84% over the past decade. Just 5,547 homes started last year against a target of 88,000. The OBR is projecting housing supply to slow further this year. The money earmarked for housing isn't flowing into bricks and mortar fast enough to matter. Now, here's the thing I promised you at the start. The number buried in the OBR report that almost nobody reported. The tax to GDP ratio. By the end of this decade, by 2030 to 31, the OBR projects the UK's tax burden will reach 38% of GDP. That is a post-war record, the highest tax burden this country has ever seen in peacetime. To put that in perspective, at the height of the Second World War, Britain raised enormous amounts of tax to fund the war effort. What's being projected for 2030 approaches those levels, not to fight a war, not to rebuild after a disaster, but just to pay for the normal running costs of the state. Every time Reeves talks about protecting working people, and she used that phrase 8 times in the spring statement, she's doing it while presiding over a tax burden that will leave working people with less of their own money than at any point in modern British history. This wasn't announced. There was no press conference about it. It's buried in a table in the OBR's Economic and Fiscal Outlook document. But it's real, and it's coming. Let's bring this down to what it means for you specifically. If you're employed, fiscal drag, with frozen tax thresholds locked in until 2030, will push more of your wage rises into higher tax bands. Every pay rise you get, a larger portion goes to HMRC. Real take-home pay growth will be minimal. If you own property, capital gains tax receipts are forecast to rise massively, from £21.8 billion this year to £34.9 billion by 2030. That's a 60% increase in CGT revenue. For property investors and landlords planning to sell, the tax environment is getting harder, not easier. Factor that into any exit strategy you're planning. If you're a landlord, welfare spending rising to £407 billion includes housing benefit and local housing allowance. That's the money that pays your rent if you have benefit-dependent tenants. It's growing, but so is the regulatory burden and so are your costs. Margins are getting thinner. If you're trying to buy, the housing supply shortfall is structural and it's not being fixed. Fewer homes being built means continued price pressure in most markets. The Bank of England's rate cuts, the thing that would make mortgages more affordable, are now at risk because of the energy price shock. The window for affordable mortgages may not open as wide or as soon as people hoped. One more thing that the spring statement coverage largely buried. Every single number in Rachel Reeves' statement, every OBR forecast, every projection for growth, inflation, borrowing, unemployment, all of it was calculated before the 28th of February, before the war started, before gas prices spiked, before the Strait of Hormuz was threatened, before Qatar Energy declared force majeure. The OBR acknowledged it in their own report. The escalating conflict could have very significant impacts on the global and UK economy. Andrew Hunter of Moody's said the spring statement's near-term outlook was already set before the conflict in the Middle East started driving up energy prices and UK government bond yields. In other words, the government told you a story about the economy based on numbers that were already out of date before the ink was dry. The real spring statement, the one that accounts for what's actually happening, hasn't been delivered yet. That comes in the autumn budget, October or November, and if the war is still running by then, that will be a very different kind of statement. Rachel Reeves said borrowing is down £18 billion and Britain is on the right path. What she didn't say, taxes are heading to a post-war record, welfare costs are exploding, the housing crisis is getting worse, and the entire forecast was already obsolete before she opened her mouth. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's in the documents, in the OBR's own words. Your job, as someone who wants to protect their money and their property, is to understand what's actually happening, not just the headline. Now you do. If this video was useful, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.